Hey, what is up guys, it is RB Hardware, and in today's video we're gonna build the best $1,100 gaming PC that you can get in late 2020 and in 2021. Now this PC comes with Nvidia's brand new RTX 3060 Ti graphics card ready for Cyberpunk 2077. Now in today's video we're gonna go over the whole building process from start to finish, and we're then going to fire up the PC and we're going to look at what kind of frame rate you can expect in case you decide to build this PC. Now if you find anything you like, all items are linked up down below. For $1,079 to be specific, you're getting a powerhouse of a PC and you'll be able to run all games maxed out at 4040p with great frame rate. But even 4K gaming with high settings will in many cases run very smooth as well. And in case you're interested what kind of frame rate you can expect in some of the most popular games, you can jump over to the benchmark section and you find timestamps down below. Now if you're spending about $1,100 for a gaming PC expecting frame rates locked at 240 FPS in competitive shooters, only makes sense, right? Just taking a quick look at Fortnite, we're averaging well over 200 FPS at 1080p with competitive settings. But even demanding titles such as Red Dead Redemption 2 at ultra settings at 1440p runs great too. Anyway, this particular build we find a case from Asus called TUF GT301, a high quality MSI B450 Tomahawk motherboard, 16GB of RAM, AMD's latest and greatest 5th gen Ryzen processor, and Nvidia's brand new RTX 3060 Ti graphics card. But before we get started, be sure to drop a comment, let me know what you thought about the video, drop a like if you enjoyed the content, and make sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. So let's get started with our motherboard coming in at $115. This is the MSI B450 Tomahawk Max. Now while opting for AMD's all new B550 motherboards with support for upcoming CPU releases is an option, ATX based B550 chipsets are unfortunately quite expensive, therefore I ended up picking the Tomahawk B450 coming in at just over $100. The Tomahawk Max comes with all the bells and whistles such as 6 fan headers, got great VRMs, USB 3.1 Type-C as well as an M.2, and even support future Ryzen processors through an update that's just been released. And I'm going to show you guys the update process step by step a little bit further into the video. For the CPU for today's build I went with AMD's brand new 5th gen Zen 3 based Ryzen 5 5600X. This blazing fast 6-core and 12-thread CPU is the fastest and best budget gaming processor on the market right now, with performance that beats even Intel's best performing and most expensive processors out there. Now taking a quick look at some gaming benchmarks, we see that the 5600X straight blows with the much more expensive 10-core 10900K, and it even beats Intel's latest 10th gen 10700K in Death Stranding. In Gears 5, the 10900K actually gets beaten by a few FPS, believe it or not. And even in Metro Exodus, the $299 5600X is dominating the field. Anyway, the Ryzen 5 5600X has a base clock of 3.7 and a 4.6 GHz boost clock. Now the cooler I picked for today's build is the stock cooler that comes with our CPU. Now while this heatsink doesn't offer the best thermals and isn't the most quiet cooler available, it is still perfectly good enough for gaming in a case with good airflow. And here's what the system sounds like running Battlefield 5 maxed out with ray tracing set to ultra. Now the installing the processor is quite simple. You want to locate the golden triangle on the processor. Now this triangle lines up with the triangle on a motherboard socket. Now you simply want to turn the CPU so that the triangles match up. You want to open the metal arm, drop the processor into the socket, put the metal arm down, and our CPU is installed. Now the cooler installment is also very simple. Now as we can see, our motherboard comes with a retention frame pre-installed, but since we're using a cooler with springs rather than retention clips, we need to remove the retention frame from the motherboard, and we do so by unscrewing the 4 screws holding it in place. With the retention frame removed, ensure that the backplate remains in position with the holes on the motherboard. Now if this is the first time installing the CPU cooler, it may already have some thermal grease pre-applied. and in that case you don't need to apply thermal grease on the CPU lid. Before positioning the CPU cooler over the 4 spring screws, for optimal clearance guys, I recommend turning the frame of the heatsink 90 degrees, which is held in place by 4 Phillips screws. You first need to take off this frame here that is held in place by these clips. With the frame turned by 90 degrees and put back in place, gently position the cooler over the CPU so that the 4 spring screws on the heatsink align with the 4 screws on the back plate. Now gently turn each spring screw half a turn clockwise to ensure the spring screw makes a connection with the back plate. Follow a diagonal pattern across the CPU cooler, further tightening each spring screw with the full turn. And with all 4 spring screws connected with the back plate, tighten them up until you feel resistance. Lastly, we connect the fan power cable on the CPU cooler to the CPU fan header on the motherboard. Now we're almost done with the motherboard guys, and the only thing missing is a RAM, and for today's build I ended up picking these top of the line, highly popular 16GB Vengeance LPX RAM sticks from Corsair. Now this 3600MHz kit I chose for today's build will give you a bit of a frame rate boost versus using a slower clocked kit, as the way that these Ryzen CPUs work, having faster clocked RAM can gain a bit of performance in your favorite game. So to install this, you want to pull back the clips for the 2nd and the 4th DIMM slot and simply plug them in just like so. Alright, so it's time to slide our motherboard into our chassis, and for today's build I chose the Asus TUF GT301. This is a mid-tower case with 3 120mm Aura addressable RGB fans, a ventilated honeycomb design front for maximum airflow, plus another 120 rear fan. So effectively guys, we find 4 fans here in total. The case comes with a tempered glass side panel, support for both mechanical hard drives and SSDs, and up to a 360 AIO cooler. And the main reason I picked up the TUF GT301 for today's build is first and foremost, it's a good airflow, but even the quality and price is fantastic. With Asus you can always count on a high quality PC build experience, and I gotta be honest you guys, I had so much fun building in this PC case. So let's install a motherboard, and in order to get access to the inside of our chassis, we need to untie these 2 thumb screws holding the tempered glass in place. Having the CPU cooler installed, we can grab onto the CPU fan and slide the motherboard into place, and this can be done either by having the case standing up or laying down, which is what I actually prefer. Secure the motherboard by using the screws that comes provided by Asus. And with the motherboard installed, before we install our power supply, graphics card and storage, I figured this is a good time to install the chassis cables that takes care of the front audio, USB as well as the power button. Let's start with USB 3. This is a white connector. It is fairly thick as you can see, and it's almost impossible to miss. Simply route it through one of the various routing holes and plug it in just like so. The connector is located down at the bottom of the motherboard. Next up we got front audio. This cable goes to the left side corner. Lastly, before we're done, we got the front panel connectors, and you find these down at the middle. Now these can be a bit tricky guys, but yeah, don't stress it, just take your time here. Time to install our power supply, and for today's build I once again ended up picking the Corsair CV550 watt unit. Now this is a high quality power supply, it has a 80+ bronze efficiency certification, coming in at just $58. Now 550 watt is actually more than enough for this PC build with this 65 watt TDP CPU, but if you want a bit more headroom in case you want to overclock, this 600 watt unit from VGA can also be a great option to consider. Both options guys are linked up down below. Now you want to make sure that you got the fan facing downwards, then you gently slide the power supply gently into place and secure it. Now there are a couple of cables we're gonna need here, and first up we got the 24-pin power for the motherboard. And this one goes to the connector on the mid left side. Next up we got the 8-pin power for our CPU, this one goes all the way up to the top left side corner. Time to install our SSD, and for today's build I ended up picking the Kingston A400 with either 480GB of storage or 960 depending on your budget. Now I've been using Kingston for many of my PC builds now and they never fail to disappoint. They always seem to hit that price and performance curve with their SSDs, and I'm feeling so confident guys recommending them in many of my PC builds now. A mechanical spinning hard drive is also an option, and while this will give you more storage per dollar, I don't recommend having a mechanical hard drive as your main system drive. But keep in mind guys, you can always add more storage later down the road, as the case has plenty of room and you can fit up to 2 mechanical hard drives in the front. And you can install another SSD in the case as well, and there is also an option to install an M.2 unit on the motherboard, which is also a very nice sweet bonus. In order to install our SSD, we're gonna use one of these 2 available SSD brackets, so secure the SSD using 4 screws that comes provided with our Asus case. You wanna plug the SATA cable that comes with our MSI motherboard, as well as the SATA power connector coming from our power supply. Route the SATA cable through one of the various routing holes and plug it into the motherboard. Alright, so time to install our graphics card, and in today's build I picked up this new GeForce RTX 3060 Ti graphics card. This is Nvidia's latest $400 GPU, designed to replace the RTX 2060 Super, and compared to the 2060 Super, the RTX 3060 Ti is without a doubt a substantial upgrade, as we're going to find out in just a second. Unlike the 2060 Super, the 3060 Ti comes with 8GB of GDDR6 memory clocked at 7000 MHz, which results in 14 gigabits per second transfer speed. Now, in order to install a graphics card, we need to take out these 2 upper PCIe slots, and then we can just gently install our graphics card just like so. Plug in this PCIe cable and our graphics card is installed. Now what is left to do is to flip the case around, whack on the tempered glass side panel, and then we have, officially completed our $1100 gaming PC build. And if you did everything right guys, your system should power on. So let's fire up some games and find out how it performs. But before we do, let's update our motherboard first. Now this step might be required if you buy a B450 motherboard right now, but let's say you watch this video a few months after it was uploaded. There's a great chance guys you don't even have to do this step. Now to double check if the update is necessary, if you're only seeing a black screen upon startup, an update will be necessary. Now updating is super easy, and all you need is a USB stick and an internet connection to download the latest available BIOS from MSI. Link to where you can find this BIOS update can be found down below. Once downloaded, make sure to rename the file to msi.rom, put the file on the USB stick, then you wanna plug the USB into the BIOS flashback port and then press the flash button, and a red LED will start flashing for a few minutes. Eventually your PC will restart and you will see this screen which indicate that our update is completed. Now you want to jump into BIOS and you want to head over to OC on the left side, and you want to scroll all the way down to something called Extreme Memory Profile XMP, and you want to select Profile 1. This will activate the RAMs to run in its advertised speed for optimal performance. Press escape and save all the settings. So starting at 1080p at high settings, I noticed that the RTX 3060 Ti performs very similar to last generation RTX 2080 Super. Now the RTX 3060 Ti is only about 15% slower than the $499 brother RTX 3070 on average. Now keep in mind, 1080p gaming isn't going to put too much strain on the GPU as let's say 4K or 1440p. And speaking of which, if we jump over to 1440p, which is really what the card is marketed at, we quickly see that the 3060 Ti runs very well at this resolution, even with lots of graphics detail. and we're averaging over 60 FPS in every title tested. If we take a look at Godfall for example, the 3060 Ti is not a whole lot slower than the RTX 3070. And looking at the 2060 Super, we see that the 3060 is actually 48% faster. In Watch Dogs Legion, the 3060 Ti does not disappoint either, where it outperforms the last generation 5700 XT by a whopping 30%, and the 3060 Ti also performs very well in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, as can be seen, running just about 9% slower versus the 3070. Last but definitely not least, if we take a look at 4K resolution, we see that the RTX 3060 Ti continues to show good form, and it actually performs very good in 4K resolution as well. However, this resolution is not recommended in all situations, as the frame rate can get close to 30 FPS in some titles, as can be seen. However, keep in mind guys, we're running the games here in ultra settings, and so you can always dial back on the settings a bit to reach a satisfying frame rate. Now, all PC components we just went over can be found down below. Now, I am starting up a Discord server guys, and it would be fantastic if you guys wanted to join the awesome community and start discussing PC builds and issues and everything in between. So I'm going to hang out there and answer you guys' questions, and it would feel awesome if you guys wanted to join. Now watch either of these two videos, and I will see you guys in the next video.